Right, welcome everybody. We need to crack on because time's ticking on. We're a few minutes late already and the day has only just begun. I'm Simon Cleaver, I'm the Chair of Study UK and I'm really just here to welcome you today. I guess you could call me the warm-up act. I guess if I was warm-up act, that would imply that what's to follow is some comedians, but I don't know whether that's actually going to be the case. I want to say thank you to all of you for coming today. I know some of you will have come from outside London, and it's really good that you feel that to be part of your industry is important enough to make the effort to come along. I certainly hope that you'll learn some useful things today and hear some things that you'll find useful in your working lives. It's been quite a year looking back, and there's further tumultuous events to come. There's been the election, there's been political change, there's an ever-tightening regulation environment, and of course there's even things like technological change. Our industry is going through one of its most challenging periods ever. So I hope you'll find today useful. A couple of housekeeping things. I'm really sorry to say that our afternoon plenary session with Yvonne Hawkins of HEFCE, she's been unable to make it today, and I really apologise for that. It's been a last-minute thing, but I'm happy to say that Nick Hillman of HEPI has kindly stepped in to fill the breach, and I know he's a very entertaining speaker, so that should be a good substitute. Other minor housekeeping issues. I have to say the usual thing about fire, there is no expected fire drill today, so if there is a fire alarm, run. In an orderly fashion, obviously. I suppose I ought to do rather like the air hostess and say that the exits are there, there, and there. Other things. In the past, when we've had this event, this is a lovely venue, very nice in central London, but it is quite old. So you have to look and find the toilets. There are various toilets, normally off the stairwells in various parts of the building. If you go through the refreshment area, you'll find, and go straight through, you'll find toilets through there. The gents have to go down to the floor below, and similarly, there's toilets off to the back of the auditorium, just here. Again, the gents have to go downstairs for some reason. I'd also like to encourage you, when you have breaks today, to spend some time going and seeing the various exhibitors who've come along today. And there's some very interesting exhibitors and things to look at. We've got exhibitors from IELTS, Inline Marketing, the QAA, Study Travel, the PI, and the Student Engagement Partnership. Do take some time to look at what they have to offer. There's some very interesting things there. And within that, I also want to say a huge thank you to the QAA, who are our sponsor for this event. They very much helped us and kindly funded a lot of the cost to make this an affordable event for Study UK to host in such a nice way. So a big thank you to QAA. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Ian Kimber, who is Director of Quality Development at the QAA, just to say a few words to open the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to this, what promises to be a very thought-provoking and stimulating event. QAA, we're delighted to sponsor this conference. We have, over the last number of years, strengthened our relationship and our role in partnership with alternative providers of higher education in the UK, and we want to continue that relationship into the future. I'm really pleased as I look through the program today to see that you're not shying away from tackling some of the big issues. I see the interface between immigration and international students on the agenda. I see the prevent strategy on the agenda. So the very big issues are here for you to grapple with, and I think that's a great thing. I'm looking forward to my session this afternoon, where I'll be on on a panel with a number of well-informed people talking about some of the latest policy developments in regulation, quality assurance and more broadly in the higher education space. As Alex said in his introduction in the program for today's events, what is in the offing here through the government's green paper and policy discussions are potentially a number of new opportunities for alternative providers, not least indicated through the government's productivity plan, and likely to be expanded in the contents of the green paper that's imminent. We could see widening the range of providers to stimulate competition and innovation, increasing choice for students. We could see removing of barriers preventing alternative providers from entering and growing in the market. We could see a more risk-based approach to the gateway processes. We could see a clearer and faster route to degree awarding powers. And as all of this develops and evolves, we very much look forward to working with the sector in implementing the changes that come out from these consultation processes and government policy decisions so that we can achieve outcomes that do lead to diversity, do lead to fostering of innovation, but at the same time, and very, very importantly and critically, don't lead to a diminishing of the quality of higher education in the country. We're committed also to working with you to value add to what you do. We have a number of alternative providers who are what you might call voluntary subscribers to the QAA. We'd very much like to grow that. In relation to our subscription model, we're in the throes of reviewing that at the moment to make it a more equitable and value-based proposition for providers. And watch this space for that. As I say, we're working on that at the moment, and we'll be saying more on that towards the end of the year. I'd like to just remind you as well that just outside the door here on the right we have a stand, and there'll be QAA staff members, including Rachel G, who is our fairly recently appointed head of our work with alternative providers. So please take the time to chat with and ask questions of the QAA staff that will be there today. Our presence here and our sponsorship of this is as much about our interactions with you and getting to know each other as it is anything else. So I wish you a great day here at the conference. I'm sure it'll prove stimulating. I'm looking forward to the discussions, and happy to also mingle and meet with people throughout the day. And as I say, looking very much forward to our panel discussion later on today. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Simon. Thank you again to QAA for sponsoring this year's Study UK conference. Of all the organisations in the higher education sector that I've interacted with over the last 4 years, I think it's fair to say QAA have been unrivalled in their willingness to work constructively with the independent sector, their enthusiasm for understanding what makes independent providers tick, what makes us special, and their genuine belief in, cliche alert, the level playing field for all providers. And so I'd like also to thank their recently departed Chief Executive, Anthony McLaren, for all his support, and look forward to a long and productive relationship with the agency over the coming years. Speaking of years, what a difference just one can make, especially when a year in question happens to have a general election within it. When I stood here a year ago, the coalition government was on its last legs, its two parties champing at the cabinet bit to distinguish themselves, disentangle their political identities, and lay claim to their particular achievements in power. Labour, meanwhile, seemed in a strong position to win back power, perhaps with a coalition of left-leaning parties in the UK. They have some quite interesting ideas, actually, for further and higher education reform. Liam Byrne, in particular, showing mastery of his higher education brief, whatever you may have thought about their tuition fees policy. Their shadow immigration minister, David Hanson, stood here a year ago at this conference and showed himself to be a very reasonable man who recognised the importance of our sector and the value of our global appeal. But democracy strikes as fast as lightning, and one night in May washed away all of those Labour policies and that shadow cabinet, until Cameron and Osborne started borrowing a few of them, I think, in recent weeks. But I mentioned manifestos intentionally because it was last year's conference I first spelled out some of our policy prescriptions that would form the core of our own Study UK manifesto. And this is an important milestone for us. It's the very first time we'd put forward publicly a set of proposals with the aim of influencing the next government's agenda. Of course, we'd offered our opinion before on reforms. We'd held meetings, roundtables, responded to consultations, engaged in the development process for policy. But this had all been largely reactive work, and our representation focused on isolated issues with an impact on day-to-day activity for our members, but mostly not looking so much at the bigger picture, more zoomed in. But our manifesto is proactive, not reactive. It looks forward, not back, and it shows government and the sector that we can be constructive partners in building a better education system for all students. Because ultimately that's our aim, and that's our promise to you, not to complain about things, not to react to things, but to do things for ourselves. Not merely to respond to events, but to help shape events. Politics is the art of the possible, so our manifesto was not pie in the sky. It did not dream of some Elysian fields of perfect policy, pain-free regulation, and boundless opportunity. It just included 10 recommendations, common-sense, realistic reforms, which would get us some way along the road to our vision for a more dynamic, diverse, and world-leading further and higher education sector. We developed these recommendations in consultation with you, from conversations we've had with you and others in the sector, from our experience of working within the current system of regulation for both domestic and international students. We launched our manifesto at House of Commons in March. If you haven't got a copy, there's plenty in the reception area. We had a cross-party audience, MPs, peers, sector representatives. And just 7 months later, I'm delighted that a good half of our proposals appear well on their way to realisation. I mean, this is in large part thanks to the ambition and enthusiasm for reform that Joe Johnson has shown in his first few months as Higher Education Minister. I know that the Minister would have liked to be here today, but unfortunately we couldn't make the diaries work. We are, however, meeting him later this month to discuss our ideas for reform, and we'll of course invite him to come to next year's conference and speak to you directly. Many of his ideas for reform will be receiving an airing soon in the government's Green Paper on higher education, which is due for publication any day now. It was tomorrow, I think. I think it may have been delayed slightly. But I'm delighted that we have here today Ian Coates, who is the newly appointed Deputy Director for Alternative Providers at BIS. He'll be able to give you a flavour, perhaps a bit of a sneak preview on the Green Paper. But we already know it will address many of the issues we raised in our manifesto and in the countless meetings we've held since the last white paper failed to translate into legislation. I'm optimistic this time that with a Conservative majority government, a new minister with energy and a broad consensus about what needs to be done, that this time will be different. And we will see a new higher education bill by 2017, as we call for in the manifesto, our first recommendation. We're also confident that such a bill would go a long way to enshrining access, equity, and beneficial competition in the sector. Recommendation 2, if you are wondering. Establishing an effective route to market for new providers is something that Joe Johnson is committed to, and we look forward to working with him in this area. Perhaps the most important key to unlocking or unblocking the route to entry for higher education providers is course validation. The Minister compared the current situation with the idea of Byron Burgers having to ask McDonald's to give their permission to open a new restaurant. It's an apt analogy, even if he did borrow it from one of our board members. Don't worry, Joe, we believe in open access. So. But bilateral validation agreements between degree-awarding universities and smaller independent providers have often worked very well in the past and can provide the basis of a real academic partnership between institutions. But in recent years, the balance of perceived risk versus reward for such arrangements has tipped too far, I think, for both universities and colleges. And hence, this activity has become increasingly rare, cumbersome, and expensive, costs which are all ultimately borne by the student. So we believe a nationally available, independent alternative to bilateral arrangements of validation is an essential prerequisite to a genuinely competitive higher education sector, capable of meeting student demand for choice, efficiency, and innovation. And it's recommendation 4 in our manifesto. So we're delighted that it found its way into the government's productivity plan this July. We will, of course, respond very positively to the question on this in the Green Paper. But we are by no means sitting back and waiting just for the government to invent a solution, invent a new agency, a new quango which can somehow escape the bonfire which is coming. We are instead considering ways in which we can develop our own sort of solution to this problem, a solution which is led by the sector, designed by and for the sector, and which might not require a long wait for legislation to take effect. Shaping events, not responding to events, that's what we want to try and do. That's all I'll say at the moment on that subject, but we will return to validation before long. The final point I want to make on higher education reform is also, I think, the most important. Study UK believes in a competitive market, a dynamic market, a diverse sector, and we believe that this will produce considerable benefits for students and for the country. But in a true market, there will be losers as well as winners. In a true market, providers will enter the sector, but they will also exit it. And sadly, the sight of providers being forced out of the market has been all too commonplace under the Tier 4 sponsorship system for international students. To a less dramatic extent, universities and colleges frequently discontinue courses, and this kind of flux in the curriculum will be more common, I think, as market pressures intensify. And students can't be allowed to suffer because of these pressures. They must have assurances that in the event of the closure of their course or of their institution, they will be able to complete their studies either at the same or an appropriate alternative institution, and that their investment of time, energy, and money is not wasted. In the last, and only the last, I think, resort, students must be financially compensated for such closures. This matters. It's affected thousands of students already, mostly those who came from halfway across the world to study in the UK on a visa. And it's not satisfactory. It must be dealt with as a matter of urgency, I believe. And warm words, feel-good statements or a voluntary code of practice are not enough. Only a universal national system of student protections, course and credit transfers will solve this problem and solve what we must. So we are pleased that Joe Johnson also tackled this issue in his speech to the University UK conference last month. And I'm afraid it's probably universities who will, in the first instance, be most resistant to doing what needs to be done on this issue. So it may fall to us, to independent providers, to Study UK, to take the lead this time. And we'll be considering the best course of action to do this and discussing our ideas with members in due course. I mentioned international students in passing. I won't dwell on them as we have a great session coming up. right after me, which I think will tackle it in illuminating detail. But rest assured, we have not given up that particular fight. However daunting the challenge may seem, we are channeling much of our efforts currently through the national campaign group Exporting Education UK, which we are very happy to give a permanent home to last summer. That is chaired by Graham Abel, who will speak after me. And essentially, we recognise that Study UK shares its concerns with the sector, and we're much stronger when we work on this sort of issue of common interest together. So that's what we're doing. With a new focus also on localised lobbying, which will build awareness, we hope, and support of international students in local communities. So when time is right for a shift in a national conversation, national debate on the issue, we'll be ready with a broader base of support in Parliament and across the country to make the most of that opportunity. So that is about it for me. Our annual conference has always been a largely sort of policy-centric affair, but Study UK is also making strides in other areas. For instance, next March we'll be taking a number of our best creative education providers to Indonesia for our first ever direct marketing initiative, visiting schools around Jakarta, giving students in these schools a hands-on experience of learning in a creative discipline, and hopefully whetting their appetite for coming to the UK and studying at an independent provider. We hope to use this experience as a bit of a launch pad for further overseas activities and make the most of our newly accredited UKTI Trade Challenge Partner status. If any of you are interested in discussing what kind of marketing opportunities might be on the horizon, any ideas, please talk to my colleague Jane, who's sitting at the back there, hiding. She's the sort of the multitasking master sort of brain behind our events and marketing program, and the architect of this conference. Finally, I know you are all passionate about being the best in your fields, getting the best from your staff, providing our students with the best opportunities. And while we're still small, and Study UK's resources are strictly limited, believe me, I want you to know that our ambition is not. I am just as passionate about Study UK being the best we can be, delivering the best service possible in the areas which matter to you, and above all, representing the best that independent education has to offer. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the day. I'll just hand over to Graham now. Graham, as I mentioned, is the chairman of Exporting Education UK. He has spent a career in the school sector for the last 20 years or so as headmaster and principal. He was master of Dulwich College for 12 years and helped them to, was I think the architect behind their program of opening schools in China and other parts of Asia, spreading the Dulwich brand internationally. More recently, he was the chief executive of Alpha Plus Group and is still their deputy chairman. Alpha Plus include both schools and sixth form colleges, including DLD College in London, which has a stunning new premises just opposite Houses of Parliament, which I encourage you to go and visit if you haven't. And I mean, Graham is an internationalist by instinct, and he has seen international students succeed in this country. He's seen British education be well received overseas, and he cares deeply about making sure we don't lose our position in the global market for education. And I'll hand over to Graham now to speak more on this topic.